Hello and welcome back to a new video. This one is going to be all about baking. And the very first thing I'm baking is this sort of a bread. We're actually having this for dinner and I really like it because it comes together really quickly and you can separate or prepare part of it a little bit earlier. Like it doesn't even have to be on the same day that you're baking this bread. And that's what you see me do right here. I am chopping up some cheese, some black olives, and sausage. Now, these I'm specifically doing cheddar cheese. I'm doing the black olives, as I said, and for the sausage, I don't like spicy food, so I chose something that's more mild. But I think all of these can be adjusted or changed for something else depending on what you might find to be an interesting taste in the bread. And I'm trying to do roughly similar amounts of all these three so that you have roughly the same taste in the bread and the same color combination. If you could find something that's maybe a little bit more red or even green as well, maybe combining the red and green olives, that could look interesting as well. I think it's just nice that these add some visual component to the bread and not just to the taste of it. And so I think I've done this like a couple hours before, maybe like in the morning, and then I did all the baking in the evening, something like that, and I just put all the chopped up things into the fridge in the meantime. And when I was ready to bake, I mixed all the other ingredients, which, by the way, you can find all the exact amounts in the description of the video down below. So I've mixed some all-purpose flour, some baking powder, a little bit of sugar and salt, some butter, and I mixed all of that with my hands, kind of the butter mixing into all of the dry ingredients. And then it was time to add the sausage, the cheese, and the olives. And by the way, the recipe I was using for this is also calling for parsley, I guess to add the green component, but I just am not a big fan of parsley, so I've skipped on that one. Now, the last thing that you're supposed to add is buttermilk, or at least that's how Google translated what we here in the Czech Republic call podmasli. And this is a point that is even a bigger point in one of the other recipes that I'll be making. But as I am making all of these videos, I'm realizing that not all ingredients are the same across the world. So I know that a big part of my audience is in the US, and there are a lot of differences, especially when it comes to baking ingredients. Things like all of these milk products, like the buttermilk, the different cheeses, the different creams, all of these things have very, I would say, confusing names. And I have read a lot of articles over these last couple months that also say that even though the translation seems to be pretty clear, when you know what something tastes like here in the Czech Republic and then you go to the US, you buy the thing that's supposed to be the same, the equivalent, it just doesn't taste the same. And I mean, I have been to the US, but that was a long time ago. And back then I wasn't really big into cooking, so I don't really have my own personal experience with this. But I have read this about the buttermilk as well, that even though it should be the same, it just doesn't taste the same. So, I mean, that's what I'm using. So that's what's in the recipe. And I guess if you want to try it, you will just have to go with the buttermilk equivalent. And so you mix all of that in. I think this time when I was making this, I could have added a little bit more of the flour, like it was just a little bit more sticky, but I mean, it turned out absolutely fine. So it was just that the process of putting it into the shape of the bread was a little bit more difficult, but other than that, it didn't change anything about the final result. So once you do shape it into like a little circle and put it on your baking tray, you then want to kind of score it, you could say, but really you just cut into it, marking the separate slices of it, and you can of course cut it into whatever you want. I've cut it into 8 pieces here, or marked the 8 pieces. You don't cut it all the way through. And then it baked in the oven at 220 degrees Celsius for about 20-25 minutes. When you take it out and you knock on it, it should have a very hollow sound. That's how you know that the bread is done. And here's me starting on another dinner. This time it will be a sort of a quiche, so a savory pie essentially. And I'm starting with my favorite, some onions and bacon. This time I'm using red onions. I think that they just add a nice sweet touch to the filling for this pie or this quiche. So I really like using those for this one. And I'm cutting up quite a few of those and quite a bit of the bacon. And I am then browning both of them in some butter. And again, this is something that you can just do, I would say, like a couple hours ahead of making the quiche is absolutely fine. I wouldn't do this one like a day before, or, you know, morning versus evening or something like that. But maybe like 2 hours before you get to the whole baking process, that's absolutely fine. Because one, it does take a while to brown if you're really doing it very slowly on like a very low heat. I think I kept it on the stove for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, so that it doesn't go, you know, too fast. It's not burning or anything. So I took my time with the onion and bacon. Now for the dough, you might remember if you've seen the other video where I made the walnut pie. It's the same dough, or I was in that video talking about this dough, how I'm using a similar dough for a quiche and how that one always works versus the one for the walnut pie that's a lot more difficult to work with. So this is the easy one. So you do some all-purpose flour, quite a bit of butter, some salt, and then only those 3 ingredients. You mix those together, and then you pour in 8 tablespoons of cold water. And basically the whole time you're working with this dough, you're trying to keep it cool, which is why you will see me put it into the fridge a couple times throughout this process. So I'm mixing first the 3 ingredients, then adding the water, and then putting everything into the fridge for 30-ish minutes, an hour. It can stay there for longer, but then once you're taking it out, you're rolling it into the shape of the pie. So if you leave it in the fridge for too long, it will become quite hard, and you may have to leave it on the counter to kind of soften again for, you know, a couple minutes or however long it may need. So it's kind of a, you know, back and forth. You do have to kind of stick to the right timings to not have any, how do I say, like you don't have to wait for it to soften again and so on. So 30 minutes in the fridge, and then you roll it out and put it into your pie baking dish. Now, I have to say one thing about this recipe is that for my baking dish, I always have quite a bit of leftover dough. And I've told myself like pretty much every time I am making this, that I have to try and come up with more, better fitting amount of ingredients so that I have a more, precise amount of dough so that I don't have so much left over, because then I never know what to do with the leftover. Or maybe I just have to figure out what to do with the leftover dough. But anyways, so I put it into the form and then it again goes into the fridge for about 20-ish minutes. And here it doesn't matter as much if you go over the time, because you're not doing anything else with the dough, like you're not shaping the dough in any other way, so it can stay there for a little bit longer. After those 20 minutes, when I take it back out of the fridge, I am putting some baking paper on top of the dough and then weighing it down with these, I'm sure you're familiar with these, like these ceramic beans, essentially. Like you could use actual beans, but I always feel, wasteful because then you're baking everything in the oven. So I assume the beans get destroyed that way and you can't use them for anything else. So I use these ceramic beans that I can, of course, repurpose for all the baking needs I have. So it goes into the oven at 200 degrees for about 25-ish minutes. And in the meantime, you can prepare the filling. So in a bowl, you're mixing 2 eggs, some heavy cream, the onion and bacon that we've made earlier, some grated cheddar cheese. Here you can use, of course, other types of cheese as well. And then a little bit of salt. And once the pie crust is done, you of course take off the baking paper and the beans or whatever you're using to weigh it down. By the way, you want to do this so that the dough doesn't rise in the oven and doesn't create these bubbles on the surface and things like that. You want the dough to stay in place. That's why you're weighing it down. And then you pour in the filling. I always have to be quite careful because the dough is very shallow and there is a lot of filling. So I then have to kind of carefully spread around without it going absolutely everywhere and over the top. So, and then the last thing is pouring a little bit more of that cheese on top of it and goes into the oven. 20 to 25 minutes. You want it to be nice and golden at the top, and then it makes for the most delicious dinner, and I always enjoy this so much. This last thing is not a dinner, it's more of a dessert. We are also going to have it for breakfast, and I'm pretty sure you will think it looks like a cheesecake, and it definitely does, and it does taste similar, but it is, I would say, a Czech version of a cheesecake because it is using a very Czech or Central/Eastern European ingredient, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. For the dough, I'm mixing some all-purpose flour, a little bit of powdered sugar. I'm also adding in this, well, essentially it's a vanilla substitute. It's these tonka beans that have been powdered. So and you really have to be very careful with them because the flavor can be quite strong. So I'm only adding a teeny tiny bit, and also some lemon zest. And then last thing that goes in for the dough is some melted butter. And you mix it up. Since I've had the butter melted and pretty liquidy and warm, I've put the dough into the fridge just for a couple minutes while I've prepared the form for the dough, for the cake, just so that the dough would thicken, not thicken up, but you know, not be so sticky and so liquidy. Well, I guess thicken up, form up, firm up. Yes, that's the right word. And then I've poured it / spooned it into the form and then used my hands to make sure it's more or less nice and level. And then it went into the fridge again in that form, just again to firm up a little bit. I have whipped some heavy cream. And then for the rest of the filling ingredients, I have used regular granulated sugar, again, a little bit of the powdered tonka beans, a little bit of vanilla pudding powder. I hope that's something that's available everywhere. A little bit more of the lemon zest, 2 eggs, and then the mysterious Czech ingredient, something that we call here tvaroh. And just before making the voiceover for this video, I have spent a good 30 minutes looking through all sorts of article translations and whatever to see what the equivalent of this ingredient is in the US. And basically, I didn't find a straight answer. There were so many things from farmer's cheese to ricotta, mascarpone, cheese curds, like it was just so many things. I think a lot of people have agreed that if you want the real Czech thing, your best way to get it is to make it yourself from raw milk through this whole process, which I don't think if I would ever do that. Or that there are some stores, either Czechs, like actual Czech stores selling Czech foods and ingredients, or maybe Polish that, you know, you might find in bigger cities in Chicago, or somebody said that Florida has a lot of these places as well. But I have no idea. But I am guessing that since this very much resembles a cheesecake, you could also use whatever you use to make a cheesecake. But of course, since I'm adding all of these other ingredients as well, like the heavy cream, then you might have to change the amounts of the other ingredients and things like that. So it might be something that you may need to play around with a little bit if you want to remake this. But maybe this is just like an interesting point for you as well to learn that things are not the same everywhere around the world, even when it comes to simple things like milk products. Once I have it all mixed up, I mix in the whipped cream as well. Then it goes on top of that pie crust. And it goes into the oven at 180 degrees for about 45-ish minutes until it's nice and golden. And once it cools down, you can go ahead and enjoy. I hope you had fun watching me make all of these meals, and I'll see you next time. Bye!